"Someone is recording your meetings," the maid's toddler whispered. The billionaire froze. A 3-year-old girl who barely knew how to tie her shoes just said 4 words that brought a billionaire's entire world crashing down around him. 4 words. That's all it took. He had built an empire from nothing. Boardrooms, skyscrapers, deals worth hundreds of millions of dollars. He had survived hostile takeovers, market crashes, and ruthless competitors. But nothing in 38 years of life had prepared him for the moment a tiny child in pigtails looked up at him with those wide, innocent eyes and whispered something that made the blood drain completely from his face. And the worst part, she didn't even know what she was saying. "Hey, welcome back, friend. And if you're new here, we are so glad you found us. This is the channel where we share real, emotional, life-changing stories that remind you just how extraordinary ordinary people truly are." Quick question before we dive in. What country are you watching from right now? Drop your flag in the comments. We love seeing where our family is from. Now listen, this story is going to shock you, it's going to move you, and by the end you might just see trust, love, and loyalty in a completely different way. Let's get into it. Some people are born into wealth. Others build it brick by brick, with bloody hands and sleepless nights. Dominic Hale was the second kind. At 38, he was the kind of man that business magazines put on their covers and called self-made. But those 2 words never quite captured the full picture. Self-made didn't describe the nights he spent sleeping in his car at 22, eating gas station sandwiches and cold coffee, driving across 3 states to pitch his first software idea to anyone who would listen. Self-made didn't capture the grief of watching his mother work double shifts at a diner until her feet bled, or the quiet promise he made to himself standing at her grave 10 years ago. "I will make all of this mean something." And he had. Oh, he absolutely had. Dominic's tech company, Hailstone Systems, was now valued at over $4 billion. He owned a penthouse in Chicago's Gold Coast, a lakeside estate in Michigan, and a sleek modern mansion on the edge of a quiet suburb just outside of Nashville, Tennessee, which is where this story really begins. Nashville was supposed to be his escape. The penthouse was for business. The Nashville house was for living. It sat behind iron gates at the end of a long oak-lined driveway, with 7 bedrooms, a pool that reflected the stars at night, and enough silence that Dominic could actually hear himself think. He'd bought it 2 years ago after his therapist, half joking, told him he needed to touch grass more often. He laughed about that now, standing on the back porch with his morning coffee, watching the Tennessee sunrise bleed pink and gold across the sky. Life felt almost good. Part of that goodness had a name. Elena Vargas. Dominic met Elena 14 months ago at a charity gala in Chicago. She was the kind of beautiful that made a crowded room feel smaller. Tall, dark-haired, with sharp cheekbones and a laugh that sounded like it cost something. She worked in real estate development, ran in the right circles, wore the right things, said the right things. Within 3 months, she had moved into the Nashville house. Within 6, Dominic had placed a diamond on her finger. His friends were thrilled. His board members approved. Elena was polished, presentable, the kind of woman who made business dinners run smoother. Even his late mother's sister, Aunt Rosa, who had strong opinions about everything, had quietly nodded and said, "She seems fine." Seems fine. He should have paid more attention to those 2 words. But Dominic was in love, or something that felt close enough to it. He was busy. He was building. He was finally allowing himself to believe that the second chapter of his life could be softer than the first. And that's where Gloria came in. Gloria Mendez had been cleaning Dominic's Nashville home for almost 18 months. She was 31, quiet, hardworking, with calloused hands and kind eyes. She took the 6 a.m. bus from a small apartment 20 minutes away, arrived before anyone else in the house was awake, and worked with a kind of careful, invisible efficiency that Dominic genuinely respected. She didn't gossip. She didn't overstep. She kept her head down and did her job. What Dominic hadn't fully registered, Because wealthy people have a habit of not fully registering the personal lives of the people who serve them, was that 6 months ago, Gloria had started bringing her daughter to work. Her name was Mia, 3 years old, teeny, with 2 lopsided pigtails and enormous brown eyes that took in absolutely everything. Gloria's regular babysitter had moved out of state, and the backup options were unreliable or unaffordable. She'd apologized to Dominic directly the first morning she arrived with Mia on her hip, bracing herself for the worst. Dominic had looked at the child for a moment, this small, serious-faced little girl clutching a worn stuffed elephant, and simply said, "She can stay in the kitchen while you work. Just keep her out of my office wing." That was it. No fanfare. No detailed rules. And so Mia became a quiet fixture in the Nashville house, sitting on her little blanket in the corner of the kitchen, eating crackers, watching cartoons on Gloria's old phone with headphones that were slightly too big for her head. Occasionally she wondered. Gloria always scooped her back up quickly, apologizing before anyone noticed. Dominic barely interacted with the child. He was kind in a distant, distracted sort of way, the way wealthy bachelors are kind to small children when they don't quite know what to do with them. He once brought Mia a cookie from the pantry. She'd stared at him with those enormous eyes, taken the cookie with both hands and whispered, "Thank you, Mr. D." He'd smiled despite himself. Elena, on the other hand, had made her feelings about Mia's presence fairly clear. Not loudly, not cruelly, but in that precise, tight-lipped way that communicated volumes without saying much at all. She referred to the arrangement as unprofessional. She had once, within Gloria's earshot, asked Dominic if they were running a daycare now. Gloria had kept her eyes on the floor and said nothing. Dominic had smoothed it over. He was good at smoothing things over. He told himself Elena was just particular about her space. He told himself she was stressed. The wedding planning was intense, the guest list alone was 400 people, and Elena was handling most of the details personally. He told himself that once they were married, things would settle. He told himself a lot of things that spring. The Tuesday everything started to unravel began like any other morning. Dominic was in his home office by 7, a long glass-walled room at the far end of the east wing, overlooking the garden. He had back-to-back calls scheduled, 2 with overseas investors, 1 with his legal team, and a confidential internal review of a major acquisition he was quietly pursuing. Sensitive stuff. The kind of conversation that could move markets if the wrong person heard it. Elena was still asleep. Or so he thought. Gloria arrived at 6:30 with Mia, settled the little girl in the kitchen, and began her work in the West Wing as usual. Dominic closed his office door, poured his second coffee, and got to work. He had no idea that somewhere in that house something was listening. Do you think Dominic was paying close enough attention to the people around him? Or was he too caught up in his own world? Let us know in the comments below. Trust is a strange thing. You don't notice it holding everything together until the moment it starts to crack. Dominic Hale had always considered himself a sharp reader of people. In business, his instincts had saved him more than once. He'd walked away from a partnership 2 days before the other company collapsed, turned down an investor who later turned out to be under federal investigation, hired a CFO that everyone doubted and watched her triple his company's efficiency in 18 months. His gut, people said, was one of his greatest assets. But maybe that was the problem. Maybe when you spend years trusting your instincts in the boardroom, you start to believe they work just as well in your living room, in your bedroom, at your dinner table. They don't. They really, really don't. The weeks following that Tuesday in his office passed the way busy weeks always do for people like Dominic, in a blur of flights, meetings, deadlines, and decisions worth millions of dollars. He flew to New York twice, spent 4 days in San Francisco closing a partnership deal, and had a whirlwind 48 hours in London that he barely remembered by the time his plane touched back down in Nashville. Elena was a constant presence in his life. Texts throughout the day, dinner waiting when he was home, her hand in his during the rare quiet evenings they spent on the back porch. She talked about the wedding constantly. The flowers, the venue deposit, the seating chart drama involving his cousin Marcus and her college roommate who apparently had history. Normal stuff. Engaged couple stuff. Dominic nodded through most of it. Not because he didn't care. He did in theory. But because his mind was always splitting its attention between the conversation in front of him and the 17 other things competing for space in his head. Lena noticed. She mentioned it once lightly over dinner. You know, most men would at least pretend to have an opinion about centerpieces. He'd laughed, reached across the table, squeezed her hand. I trust your taste completely. She'd smiled. A slow, private sort of smile that he didn't think much about at the time. He thought about it later. Look. Around this time, Dominic started noticing small things at work. Tiny things, the kind you dismiss individually but that start to form a pattern if you're paying attention. Which, to be fair, he almost wasn't. A competitor made a move on a company that Dominic had been quietly pursuing for acquisition. A company so small and under the radar that there was no logical reason for anyone else to know it was on his radar. Yet there it was. A competing offer, filed quietly, 2 weeks after Dominic's legal team had begun early-stage conversations. His head of strategy, a sharp woman named Priya, flagged it in a Monday morning call. Could be coincidence, she said, in a tone that suggested she didn't believe that for a second. Or there's a leak somewhere. Dominic told her to look into it quietly. No noise, no accusations, just eyes open. He flew home that night feeling unsettled in a way he couldn't name. Back at the Nashville house, things felt normal on the surface. Gloria was finishing up in the kitchen when he arrived, Mia asleep in her little corner spot, curled around her stuffed elephant. Dominic set down his bag, loosened his tie, and stood in the kitchen doorway for a moment just watching the child sleep. There was something grounding about it, something that cut right through the noise of his day. Gloria looked up, startled. Mr. Hale, I'm sorry, she fell asleep earlier than usual, I'll get her. Leave her, he said quietly. She's fine. Gloria nodded, something flickering briefly in her expression. Relief, maybe, or something more complicated. She went back to wiping down the counters without another word. Upstairs, Elena was in the master suite, laptop open, phone beside her. She looked up when he walked in and gave him a warm smile. You look exhausted. Long week, he said. Come sit. She patted the space beside her on the bed. He did. She leaned her head against his shoulder, her perfume soft and familiar. For a few minutes, he almost forgot the unsettled feeling that had followed him home from the airport. Almost. Because lying there in the comfortable silence, his eyes drifting across the room, he noticed something. Small thing. So small that his conscious mind almost skipped right over it. Elena's laptop screen, reflected in the mirror of the vanity across the room, was displaying what looked like, and he couldn't be entirely sure from this angle in this light, a document. With a heading that looked familiar. He didn't say anything. He told himself he was tired. He told himself he was being paranoid. He told himself that the woman sleeping peacefully against his shoulder in 48 hours would be trying on her wedding dress for the second fitting. But that night, lying in the dark long after Elena had fallen asleep, Dominic stared at the ceiling and felt, for the first time in a long time, genuinely afraid. Not of any threat he could name or see or fight. Afraid of something closer, softer, more dangerous. He was afraid of what he might find if he started actually looking. Have you ever had a feeling deep down that something was wrong, but you talked yourself out of it? Tell us about it in the comments. You're not alone. And then, everything changed in a single moment, delivered by the tiniest messenger Dominic Hale had ever encountered. It was a Thursday morning, 10 days after that sleepless night staring at the ceiling. Dominic had been moving carefully since then, not dramatically, not accusatorially, just quietly alert. Priya's team had narrowed the potential information leak to communications originating from the Nashville property. They couldn't say more yet. They needed more time. Dominic had said fine. Take the time. Thorough. He arrived home that Thursday afternoon earlier than expected. His 2 o'clock call had ended early, and for once he didn't schedule something to fill the gap. He pulled through the gate, parked in the garage, and entered through the side door that led directly into the kitchen hallway. The entrance Elena rarely used, the one that was quieter, less announced. The house was still. Gloria's cleaning cart was in the hallway outside the West Wing bathroom. She was clearly working somewhere nearby. Dominic set down his bag and loosened his collar, moving toward the kitchen for water. That's when he saw Mia. She was standing in the middle of the kitchen, still as a small statue, staring up at him with those enormous brown eyes. Her stuffed elephant dangled from one hand. She was wearing tiny red sneakers that lit up when she walked. Dominic stopped. "Hey, little one. Where's your mama?" Mia pointed vaguely toward the hallway. Then she continued staring at him with an expression of almost unsettling seriousness. The kind of look that 3-year-olds sometimes get when they are working very hard to say something important. He crouched down to her level. "You okay?" Mia's brow furrowed. She leaned forward slightly, the way small children do when they're sharing a secret, and in a voice barely above a whisper she said, "Someone is recording your meetings." Dominic went completely still. The world around him, the hum of the refrigerator, the distant sound of Gloria's vacuum, the birds outside the kitchen window, it all went muffled like someone had pressed cotton against his ears. He looked at this child. This 3-year-old child with her lopsided pigtails and her light-up sneakers and her worn stuffed elephant. "What did you say?" he asked very quietly. Mia blinked. Repeated it simply like she was reporting the weather. "The pretty lady puts a little thing in your meeting room." Mama told her no, but she did it anyway. Dominic felt the floor tilt under him. "The pretty lady. Lena." He stood up slowly. His legs felt strange. He walked, calmly, deliberately, because some part of his brain was still operating on autopilot, down the hallway, past Gloria's cart, past the formal dining room, toward the East Wing, toward his office. He closed the door behind him. He stood in the center of the room and looked at it, really looked at it, for the first time in months. He scanned the bookshelves, desk, the credenza along the wall, the decorative items Elena had placed throughout the room over the past year. A small bronze sculpture she'd brought back from a trip to New York, a wooden clock she'd said was a gift, a geometric glass paperweight she'd set on the corner of his desk one afternoon saying it balanced the energy of the room. He picked up the paperweight, turned it over, and there it was. A small, flat, professional-grade recording device adhered to the base. Barely the size of a postage stamp. Completely invisible unless you were looking for it. The sound that came out of Dominic Hale in that moment was something between a breath and a word and a sound that had no name. He set the paperweight down on his desk very carefully. The way you set something down when your hands are shaking and you don't trust yourself not to throw it through the window. He thought about the acquisition. The competitor who'd moved in impossibly fast. The legal calls. The investor strategy meetings. The confidential internal projections. Months of conversations. Years, potentially, recorded and handed to someone else. And then, like a second blow landing before the first one had finished hurting, he thought about Elena. Her perfect smile. Her hand in his. The wedding dress fitting. The 400-person guest list. The centerpieces she'd laughed about. 14 months. He had loved her, or tried to, for 14 months. And she had been selling him to someone the entire time. He sat down in his chair. He didn't cry, he wasn't there yet, and maybe he never would be. What he felt was worse than grief in some ways. It was the specific devastation of realizing that the danger wasn't outside the walls. It had been sleeping in his bed. Gloria appeared in the doorway 15 minutes later. Her face tight with something that had been wound up inside her for a very long time. "Mr. Hale," she said quietly. I saw it 3 weeks ago. I told her to remove it. She told me if I said a word to you, she'd have me fired and reported to immigration. I have a daughter. Her voice broke. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Mia must have heard me. Dominic looked at her for a long moment. Then he simply nodded. He didn't speak for a very long time after that. What would you do if you were in Dominic's place right now? Betrayed by someone you trusted completely? Tell us honestly in the comments. When everything you believed turns out to be a beautiful, carefully constructed lie, there's a strange moment of silence before the devastation fully arrives. Dominic lived in that silence for about 4 hours. He sat in his office, the recording device in a small evidence bag his security chief had provided, and he made calls. Quiet calls. Calm, surgical calls to his lawyer, his head of security, and Priya, who, when he told her what had been found, said nothing for 3 full seconds and then said, "I'll have everything we need within 48 hours. He did not call Elena. Elena came home at 6:30 carrying takeout bags and wearing a cream-colored blouse, and she walked into the kitchen chatting about the florist being impossible, and how the ceremony arch might need to be redesigned, and did he have thoughts on lily of the valley versus white peonies. Dominic was sitting at the kitchen island when she walked in. He looked at her. Really looked at her. The way he should have been looking all along. "Hey," she said, slowing slightly when she registered his expression. "You okay? You look pale." "Long day," he said. "Come sit with me." She put the food down and sat across from him, and for a moment, just a moment, he let himself grieve something right there at the kitchen table. Not loudly, not visibly, just a quiet, internal acknowledgement of what he was losing, the idea of this life, the version of the future he'd been quietly, cautiously allowing himself to want. Then he said, "How long have you been working with Garrett Voss?" The color left Elena's face. Garrett Voss was the CEO of Dominic's most aggressive competitor, a man who had been trying to outmaneuver Hailstone Systems for 3 years. The acquisition Dominic had been pursuing, the one that had been mysteriously compromised. It was a company that would have given Hailstone a decisive market advantage over Voss's firm. Elena's mouth opened, closed. Something moved behind her eyes, calculation, he realized. Even now, caught, she was calculating. "I don't know what you don't," he said quietly. "You stop." What followed was not a screaming match. Dominic didn't have it in him, and Elena, he now understood, was far too controlled for that. What it was instead was a cold, almost unbearably adult conversation in which Elena, realizing the exit routes were closing, made the choice to stop performing and simply be honest. She had been recruited by Voss 18 months ago, before she'd even met Dominic. The introduction at the charity gala had not been an accident. Everything, the relationship, the engagement, the access to his home and his office, had been a long, deliberate strategy to get inside Hailstone Systems' decision-making. Did any of it mean anything? Dominic asked. It wasn't a wounded question. It was a genuine one. Elena looked at him for a long moment, and something in her face shifted, a fracture line in the performance, brief and quickly controlled. "Parts of it," she said softly. And then, almost to herself, "That made it harder." He didn't know what to do with that. He still doesn't. Elena was gone by morning. His lawyers handled the rest. But here is where the secondary blow landed, the one Dominic hadn't seen coming. In the days following Elena's departure, as his team worked through the full extent of the intelligence she had passed to Voss, Dominic found himself not thinking about the business damage, which was significant but recoverable. He found himself thinking about Gloria. Gloria, who had been trapped, who had discovered the device, confronted Elena, and been threatened with the destruction of her life and her daughter's stability if she spoke up, who had been carrying that weight for 3 weeks, alone and terrified, showing up at 6:30 every morning and going about her work with that same quiet, careful dignity while knowing what she knew. He called her into his office, the real office, the one that had been swept clean by security, and when she sat across from him, braced and formal in the way people are when they're preparing to be punished for something that wasn't their fault, he said, "I'm not angry with you. I want you to know that first." Gloria looked at him steadily. Her hands were folded in her lap. "She threatened you," Dominic said. "You protected your daughter. I understand that." He paused. "I also want you to know that Mia is the reason any of this was caught when it was." Gloria's composure, ironclad for weeks, quietly broke. She pressed her hand over her mouth, nodded once. "She's 3 years old," Dominic said. "And she was braver than a lot of adults would have been. Have you ever been put in an impossible position? Forced to choose between protecting yourself and doing what's right? Share your story below. We'd really love to hear it. Some endings don't arrive with fanfare. Some arrive quietly, like the first light of a morning you weren't sure was coming. In the weeks after Elena left, the Nashville house felt different. Not emptier exactly. Dominic had been largely alone in it most of the time anyway, if he was being honest with himself. It felt more like a space that had been holding its breath had finally exhaled. He threw himself back into work, because work was the language he spoke most fluently when everything else felt uncertain. Priya's team contained the damage from the leak. The acquisition, delayed but not destroyed, was restructured through a different legal channel, and by late summer, Hailstone had quietly secured the company Voss had tried to block them from. The board never needed to know the full story. Dominic knew it. That was enough. He'd also done something else quietly in those weeks, something he hadn't told anyone about. He had asked his head of HR to pull together the details of Gloria Mendez's employment contract. He had reviewed her salary, her hours, her benefits. And then he had sat with that information for a few days, the way he sat with any decision that mattered. On a Tuesday morning, a different Tuesday, a better one, Gloria arrived at 6:30 as usual. Mia was on her hip, sleepy-eyed and clutching her elephant, the little red sneakers glowing faintly in the early light of the hallway. Dominic was already in the kitchen. He slid a folder across the counter to Gloria without ceremony. She looked at it, looked at him, opened it. Inside was a new employment contract, with a salary triple her current one, full benefits for herself and Mia, and a provision for childcare support. There was also a second document, paperwork Dominic's attorney had prepared offering to connect Gloria with an immigration lawyer, fully funded, to assist with any legal matters affecting her residency status. The thing Elena had threatened her with neutralized entirely. Gloria stared at the documents for a long time. She didn't cry dramatically. She just stood very still in the way people stand when something they'd stopped hoping for suddenly becomes real. "You didn't have to do this," she finally said. "I know," Dominic said. "That's why I wanted to." Mia, who had been watching all of this with her enormous serious eyes, apparently decided the moment required her participation. She wriggled down from her mother's hip, toddled across the kitchen floor in her light-up sneakers, and held up her stuffed elephant toward Dominic with both hands. "An offering." Dominic looked at the worn, floppy elephant. He looked at this small child, this 3-year-old girl who had seen something that the adults around her had been too blind or too afraid to act on, and who had simply, in her honest, uncomplicated way, told the truth. He crouched down and accepted the elephant with the gravity the gesture deserved. "Thank you, Mia," he said. She nodded seriously. Then she took the elephant back, apparently satisfied, and went to find her blanket. Dominic stood in the kitchen for a moment after that, the morning light coming through the windows, the smell of coffee starting in the pot, the sound of a 3-year-old settling herself in the corner with her things, and he felt something shift inside his chest. Something that had been locked and defended for a very long time. He had spent years building walls and calling them success. He had confused distance with safety, control with wisdom, and wealth with judgment. He had trusted the wrong person without examining her too closely, and failed to trust the right ones because he'd barely looked at them at all. The real security in that house hadn't come from the iron gates or the alarm system or the legal team on retainer. It had come from a child with pigtails and light-up sneakers who didn't yet know how to lie. Here is what this story leaves behind. The truth doesn't always come from the people with power, credentials, or eloquence. Sometimes it comes from the smallest, quietest voice in the room, the one we almost didn't bother to listen to. And the measure of who we are is not what we achieve in the big, loud moments. It's what we choose to do when no one is watching, whether we protect the vulnerable, honor the loyal, and stay humble enough to be taught by the most unexpected teachers. Dominic Hale learned more from a 3-year-old that Thursday morning than from 38 years of boardrooms. And Gloria Mendez, driving home that Tuesday evening with a folder of documents in her bag and Mia asleep in the car seat behind her, let herself cry for the first time in weeks, not from sadness but from the unfamiliar, overwhelming feeling of being seen. Thank you for being here for this story. If it moved you, sit with it for a moment. The best ones always take a little time to settle in your chest. The world is full of Glorias, quiet, dignified, doing the right thing under impossible pressure. See them. Acknowledge them. They deserve it. If this story touched something in you, if it made you feel, even for a moment, that integrity still matters and kindness still wins, please hit that like button. It truly means everything to us, and it helps more people find stories like this one. Subscribe if you haven't already, because every week we bring you real, human stories that will make you feel deeply and think differently about the people around you. And we'd love to know, what moment in this story hit you hardest? Drop it in the comments. We genuinely read every single one. Finally, if someone in your life could use a reminder today that the truth always finds a way, share this video with them. You might not know how much they need it. Until next time, take care of yourselves, take care of each other, and we'll see you in the next story.